Welcome back to today's Explainer. If you've ever just glanced at the news lately or, let's be real, just tried to get a teenager to do their chores without a full-blown debate, you probably wondered what exactly is happening to the world right now. Well, today is absolutely for you. We are unpacking a really bold critique of modern culture, specifically looking at how society views history, morality, and identity. But we're not going to just stop at diagnosing the problem. No way. We're going to look closely at some actionable, scripturally grounded solutions for parents, leaders, or anyone really trying to navigate this crazy landscape. So whether you're a parent, a teacher, or just someone observing these cultural shifts, we've got a lot of fascinating stuff to unpack. Let's get into it. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the culture of victimhood, move into a shift in moral values, and then focus on solutions with reclaiming personal responsibility, cultivating courage at home, and finally, daily habits for gratitude. To really frame our entire discussion today, I want you to think about this question. What has happened to the moral core of our young people? Something has changed profoundly in how our young people see the world. That powerful statement comes directly from a prominent UK headmistress featured in our video source. She's very well known for her strict traditional approach to education, and she's arguing that we are currently witnessing a complete collapse of the traditional moral framework that used to guide young people. Okay, let's dive into Section 1, the culture of victimhood. Our sources identify a massive cultural conflict happening right now. On one side, you have a worldview that's entirely based on oppressor versus oppressed thinking. It's basically a lens that filters every single human interaction through power dynamics and group identity. But then, on the other side, you have the more traditional framework of personal responsibility and moral agency. That's where individuals are judged by their own choices and their own character. And the argument here is that modern society has forcefully pushed young people away from that personal responsibility and shoved them entirely over into a framework of perpetual grievance. To really back this up, the headmistress provides some pretty stark examples. She describes an incident where police officers actually hesitated to help a victim because they were reportedly terrified of being accused of racism. She also points to youth on the internet actively celebrating the tragedies of people they view as oppressors. She attributes all of this to a manufactured culture of victimhood and what she calls white guilt, which she argues is quite literally overriding basic human empathy and a sense of duty. Moving right along to Section 2, a shift in moral values. So, how did we get here? According to the sources, a huge driver of this is the way history is currently being taught in schools and presented in museums. They argue that history is being actively flattened. For example, the video mentions a museum exhibit on James Watt, the pioneer of the steam engine. But instead of focusing on his world-changing invention, the exhibit focuses heavily on his early ties to slave trafficking. The sources also argue that educational systems are heavily emphasizing Western guilt while entirely ignoring massive historical complexities, like this centuries-long Arab slave trade. The core argument is that this lack of nuance isn't an accident. It's designed to teach young people contempt for their own heritage. Expanding on this, one commentator who analyzed the headmistress's speech actually attributes this cultural decline to deliberate ideological subversion. His view is that Marxist and other ideological groups are basically engaging in asymmetric warfare. Their goal, he argues, is to systematically dismantle Western civilization by attacking its self-confidence. We're just reporting what the sources say here, but it's a fascinating perspective on the underlying mechanics of this cultural shift. But here's the twist. The headmistress doesn't just blame outside ideologies. She actually turns the mirror right back on older generations. She argues there has been a massive loss of what she calls small c conservative values, stuff like duty, hard work, and sacrifice. She points the finger directly at boomers, Gen X, and older millennials, arguing that they mistakenly took these traditional values for granted. Basically, by assuming kids would just naturally figure out right from wrong by osmosis, she says older generations abandoned their post and left Gen Z to just swim in a shallow culture of instant gratification. So, if we accept this diagnosis, that we're a society adrift in victimhood and this flattening of history, we arrive at the really big, pivotal question. How can parents actually reverse this trend and rebuild character? Thankfully, our text source provides a really comprehensive, spiritually grounded roadmap to do exactly that. Which brings us to Section 3, reclaiming personal responsibility. To counter that whole oppressor versus oppressed narrative, our text source offers a scriptural solution. It suggests replacing a group identity rooted in resentment with the biblical view that all of humanity is united as image bearers of God. This is a huge fundamental shift. You go from viewing people with suspicion based purely on their group category to viewing every single individual as having inherent God-given value. It completely flips the script. The source actually breaks this down beautifully for both kids and adults. For the kids, the big idea is simple but profound. God looks at the heart, not the outward appearance. So parents need to teach kids not to assume someone is bad just because they look or seem different. And crucially, kids need to know they are not helpless victims. For the adults, the application is to actively reject these cultural categories based on resentment. As adults, it's our job to see others as image bearers and to teach our children true discernment, rather than just ideological suspicion. Let's look at Section 4, Cultivating Courage at Home. So, how do we actually cultivate this? For kids, the message is to do what's right, even when it's really scary. This means telling the truth and refusing to just freeze up because you're terrified of what your peers might think of you. For adults, the source is completely uncompromising here. Moral courage is a duty. The application is a very strict warning against yielding to the fear of man. Adults absolutely cannot let social pressure silence their moral clarity. You have to model acting with integrity, even when, maybe especially when, it's incredibly unpopular. To really ground these kind of abstract concepts of duty and integrity, the video source shares this wonderful, highly relatable little micro-story. The headmistress talks about a colleague's grandfather who worked for 50 years at the exact same company. 50 years! He never missed a single day, regardless of how he felt. He took immense pride in his duty, and he used his life to quietly teach his grandson how to be a better man. It's exactly this type of quiet, persistent, everyday moral courage that the sources argue is so desperately missing from today's culture. The crucial point here is that courage also means having the bravery to seek the truth. Pushing back against that flattening of history we talked about earlier, the sources urge families to truly love the truth. Kids should be taught to ask tough questions, to learn both sides of a story, and definitely not to just believe everything they hear online. For adults, the mandate is to be people of truth who reject those oversimplified narratives. We're encouraged to study history honestly and to teach our children how to actually evaluate ideas, rather than just passively absorbing whatever cultural slogans are trending. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, Daily Habits for Gratitude. So, how do we build all of this into highly actionable daily routines? The sources suggest 3 immediate steps to replace cultural entitlement with spiritual discipline. Number 1, narrate your values openly and daily to your kids. Do not just assume they know them. Number 2, require children to do chores and specifically to do them with a good attitude to build a spirit of service. And number 3, practice frequent gratitude, not just when you feel like it, but as a rigid, non-negotiable family discipline. Summarizing these applications, we see that for kids, the lesson is that hard work and helpfulness are actually virtues. Saying thank you often and helping out without having to be asked builds real character. For the adults, it's a reminder that true maturity is built on discipline. The sources emphasize that real dignity comes from owning your moral agency, completely rejecting entitlement, and fully embracing a life of stewardship and sacrifice for others. This all culminates in a really powerful concept from our sources: moral inoculation. This is the proactive process of grounding your children in truth and personal accountability at home. The headmistress explicitly states that parents must essentially wargame their children's upbringing. You just cannot leave your moral formation to chance, to the internet, or to the school system. You have to actively inoculate them against ideologies that would strip them of their own agency. Which leaves us with this final, vital question for you to ponder. What values are you actively passing down to the next generation, and how will you claim your own moral agency today? The sources we've explored really challenge us to stop taking our moral foundation for granted and to start building it intentionally day by day. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.